So I think that's one thing that's definitely shaped me. It's like I really intentionally try to hire the people because I don't think you need an ego to be ambitious. I don't think you need an ego to be
Mhm.
driven. I don't think you need ego to drive things to completion. You can do all that without an ego. So I don't know, Ariana, but I feel like, did you get that? Because I definitely feel like,
Didn't
while
meet a
I try to,
diva. Didn't. Welcome back to CZM Friends, where we talk with legal leaders, technologists, and operators about leadership, the future, and hear their wisdom. I'm your host, Cecilia Zaniti. Today, I'm joined by Bill Berry, the General Counsel at security technology company Verkada, and Ariana Goodell, Senior Counsel for Privacy and Policy at Verkada. Together, they help lead one of the fastest growing legal teams in tech. They're known for pairing high performance with a culture of care and trust, and for being a legal team the rest of the company loves. And I can attest to this because I went and visited them at their offices in San Mateo just a few weeks ago. And the number of sort of high fives, great to see you, that I saw in just my short walk from their in-house coffee shop to their offices is a true guide to that. Bill's path runs from Google to Tesla to Verkada, where he guides the company through complex regulatory and commercial challenges. Ariana's background comes from privacy, data, policy, and it starts at Reed Smith, at the law firm Reed Smith, then on to FinTech branch and on to Verkada. Fun story, Ariana was my best outside counsel associate on privacy. I was so delighted when she went in-house, and just even more delighted now that she's at a company I admire in Verkada. All right, today we're going to talk about building teams that trust each other and thrive under pressure, and we'll get into AI as well. So let's dive in. Bill, Ariana, welcome to the show.
thank you.
Thanks for
Good to
having
be
us.
here.
Truly
Yeah.
full circle. Exactly. No, I remember. I think GDPR had not even come out when we first met, which is how long we know each other.
I
All right.
remember walking over to your office and just trying to game plan all of the compliance requirements with you and thinking, wow, this is like early days.
Amazing. Yeah, 55 Second Street for those of you historic building. Smith Building is just a few blocks away on Mission. So amazing. All right. So Bill, you've led legal teams at Google, Tesla, Verkada, three pretty different companies, some common threads. They all move fast. What's been the through line for your leadership across companies?
This for I don't know if there's a through line necessarily because I feel like my career path has been pretty jagged and unplanned. I didn't start out thinking I wanted to be a GC, much less a legal leader at those companies, much less a lawyer until I kind of was further along because I had a undergrad degree in electrical engineering. Then I went in the Navy for a bit, had no idea what I wanted to do, went to business school, still had no idea what I wanted to do. I have an identical twin brother who was doing the joint program with law. So he said, hey, why don't you, while you're here, do the law program too? And I was like, I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I did that. And it just one thing led to another. It just was kind of taking advantage of opportunities as they presented themselves. So I don't know if I followed like a through line. I could say this was a path I planned and thought through. This is not a good example of career planning at all. I'm not a model for career planning. And I just kind of took advantage of some opportunities and had a lot of luck, honestly, to kind of get the path I landed on.
Any lessons? Well, all three companies, Google, Verkada. So for reference, I think Verkada it's a private company, but it was. I mean, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the growth, but maybe your Navy experience or anything in your background that you're like, all right, high growth, strap in, kind of thing. What's the
Well, I guess,
any like set of experiences or
yeah.
approach or anything? Clearly, you've been drawn to this kind of company.
Yeah, I think if there was a through line, I think I have gravitated towards um, being more attuned, enjoying kind of like 1,000 different things going on. And you think back to like college days, and you had some classes that, you had a semester long project and that's all you had to do. And then you had other classes where you just had daily things that were just popping up. So you had a lot of little things to do. And then maybe something big at the end. And I found if I did this semester long class where you had one project, I procrastinated and waited to the very end and then was just painful. And I found I thrived more when I had a lot of balls up in the air, juggling rather than one big thing to work on. Like if my career path was to be a novelist and write books, I would be horrible at it because I just would not be able to do that. But if I'm like in an environment, which I think if I had to look back on it, those kind of career points all involved like juggling a lot of things at once and kind of chaos, I guess. So I guess
Yeah.
maybe if I was being, introspective looking at this, I am drawn to that that chaos, I guess.
It's interesting the chaos aspect of like, I've said on the show and more generally that I've taken sort of screeners and everything almost for like ADD, where it's like wanting to have that stimulus of, you're doing a stock option plan in the morning, in the afternoon, you're, advising on a privacy consideration. And then right after that, you're doing a big commercial deal. Ariana, you nodded. Does that resonate? The kind of like in-house experience of doing a lot of things and how does it contrast with your firm experience?
I feel like working at a startup or even in like a just a busy tech company that's emerging, you're constantly, prioritizing and multitasking. And that's just something I always thrived off of. But I feel like it just took a different form when I was a younger associate where I was getting work in the commercial litigation department, desperately wanted to work in tech. So I was like also trying to go to the different partners that had tech clients and ask them if I could help them. So I ended up having like a ton of different projects that I was trying to maintain and always kind of like working on the things that were going to show that my contribution to the firm was there, but also, really focusing on the work that was sustaining me. And I feel like my entire career path has really just kind of been to draw myself to the work that's really fulfilling me and sustaining me. And so I think about like my career path, and one of the things I think that's consistent about it is that it's not like this very linear progressive path that's just based on a role. And if that was the case, I would have gone from my VP of legal role to a GC role, and that just wasn't my path because I think I've always wanted to feed my curiosity about being a better lawyer, being a better thinker, being a better problem solver. And, sometimes your linear career path from a role perspective doesn't line up with your personal fulfillment. And you really have to follow that with, a through line of like what's going to sustain you for the next 4 years to get that equity package, right? So yeah, I think that's really returned dividends to me, but it wasn't something I, kind of thought with intentionally every step, but it was a value judgment I had to make at my last career change. Are you going to give up the title to ultimately be more fulfilled? And, for me, it was kind of clear, like based on my value sets.
And so what did you do? And that's actually since we have Bill here, like, so what do you do as a leader of a legal team? Obviously you've got the business needs, you've got to support, you have global operations, you have, a sales team in the hundreds. How do you motivate lawyers as good as Ariana to join the team? And then how do you think about fulfillment across the team?
Well, it's funny because I just met with our legal recruiter because we're hiring still. And it just, to me, I feel like this is true everywhere you are. And it's also true, I mean, I'm sure, Ariana, you saw this at Branch. It's just hiring is like one of the most important things you do, if not the most important thing you do. And it's a lot of faith, unless you really have a tie and you know the person. There's a lot of just a leap of faith to see if this person's going to be a fit, because obviously you kind of start like the table stakes are smart and they bring the experience you to bear that you need for that role. But I feel like it's so much more than that. If that was just all that you had to deal with when you're trying to hire somebody. And I think Ariana is a good example. We needed somebody really steeped in privacy, but we're fast moving as crazy, and we need somebody who's going to be, you know, comfortable in that kind of chaotic environment. And I kind of equate it to if you've ever gone like house hunting or looking for an apartment and you find the place that just fits, you just know. Like you just know the instant you walk in, like, this is it. And I feel like that happens sometimes. It definitely happened with Ariana when we were interviewing her. Like Elizabeth Davies, who's our chief privacy officer, we kind of both walk away like, she's it. Like, I don't know if we have to interview anybody else. We'll probably have to interview people just to like say we interviewed other people, but Ariana's who we want. It was just something that clicked. You knew, obviously, super sharp, super smart, very steeped in privacy law and regulations. So she had that experience, but just her presence and her kind of her humility and her demeanor, just like, this is a great fit. This is going to be exactly what we're looking for. I don't know, Ariana, if you got that. Were we bad at holding our cards close to our chest as we're interviewing her? But we were gaga over you the minute we started talking to you.
I feel like, it's funny. My first time interviewing at a tech company and then ultimately getting that role, I think back to like the questions I asked, and they were so shallow compared to after having lived and breathed at a startup for 5 years, you start to realize what is critically important to make this next career jump worth it for me, whether it's the quality of the leadership or the experience of the leadership or like the type of team that, the leader wants to build. And for me, I feel like I'm always really curious about, I do this too when I was in a hiring mode trying to find direct reports. I was always curious about Like, what motivated people? What are they looking for in trying to build out a team? Because I felt like that was really insightful in understanding, when you find people that are thoughtful and they're trying to thoughtfully build a team with intention, usually that kind of speaks volumes and it's a proxy to so many other positive qualities that you can kind of bundle a bunch of questions just in one kind of loaded question. But I mean, if you think about it in the reverse too, I also feel like it's important to not just ask the right questions, but also to understand, like, think about like what kind of questions the interviewee is asking you. Because I feel like when I was interviewing candidates, I was always really struck by the candidates that tried to ask questions that got to motivations. And you could tell those are the people that are really trying to find understanding or motivation and understanding people. And because that's ultimately what makes you successful. You can have all the skill sets in the world, but if you can't translate that in a way that's going to motivate somebody or speak to what they empathize with or speak their language, like, you're really not going to be successful. So when I was interviewing, I remember asking Bill like what he looks for in team members, like, 10 years from now, what kind of legal team does he want to build? What are the qualities that he wants kind of shine through on top of all the people? And I tried to talk to as many people as I could in the team too, because I feel like, the proof is really in the pudding. The more people that you get to meet and talk to, that's representative of the people that he's led or that leader's led on the team. And so meeting as many people as you can to kind of do that vibe check. It sounds kind of hand wavy, but I feel like if you're being thoughtful about where you're going, you have a good sensibility about how you feel when you spoke to that person. Were they being authentic? Are they being caring and thoughtful and smart about how they want to build out the team?
Do you remember what my answer was?
Yeah, I don't know if I feel like I did somewhat black out because it was like a marathon of interviews. But I just remember, I think one of the things that really set me at ease when I was doing an interview was it really just felt kind of like this podcast. Like, it felt like a conversation. It wasn't like this series of kind of loaded questions to kind of catch me in some sort of like gotcha answer. And when it really put me at ease. And I feel like that's kind of like a parallel to how I love it when I collaborate with people on the team. Like, when you feel like you're not being judged because you're being vulnerable by putting an idea out there that like hasn't been tested or tried or true. And you feel like you can bring your authentic self to an interview. That's really the sweet spot where you really get to know somebody. So I just remember how surprised I was by how conversational the interview felt and how like meaningful the interview felt. Like, it felt like it really helped me get to the answers of my questions. Hopefully it did for you, but
Yeah, for sure.
How have you taken that approach, assuming that you have, with stakeholders? So you all, for maybe you can tell us what Verkada does, and then I think that'll open the door to make it obvious to listeners why it might be that you need to earn trust of your stakeholders. So tell us about what Verkada does, and then how do you think about what Ariana just said around building that ability to be authentic, to be vulnerable, to come up with new ideas? Environment where, you have real compliance considerations.
Yeah. So Verkada, it's a B2B play. It's a company that provides basically cloud-based products, services to basically support any kind of business or entity in terms of the building safety. So obviously we started out with cameras and kind of what you think of a physical security system, cameras and access control alarms. But we've gone beyond that, with guest management and air sensors, and really becoming and trying to become that kind of smart building platform that can be for schools, government agencies, or big office buildings, kind of the broad spectrum of clients. And so in that context, we're very fast moving. When I first got here in 2022, we were less than 1,000 employees, and we doubled the size literally of the office in HQ. Maybe a year later, we're now up to 2,300 employees with 17 offices worldwide. So we're just rocket ship growth. And when you're in that environment, I think it's important, you have to have efficiency of communication and efficiency of kind of giving legal advice. And I'm a big believer that Legalese is like just bad for that type of efficiency and having that kind of authentic conversation. And so we definitely are looking when we're interviewing folks, and this is why we were so enthralled with Ariana, just they can have a conversation. And you won't feel like you're talking to a lawyer. You feel like you're talking to a person that's in the boat with them making business decisions. And of course, they've got kind of the legal framework and trying to make sure that you don't fall trap to any legal landmines, but you're really having a business-minded conversation with them and kind of toss legalese out the window. No legal memos, no, you just don't need to use all those legal buzzwords that we just get so used to, especially in the law firm context, to use that now being on the client side, I'm curious what you think, Ariana, going from outside counsel to inside. No client wants that. No client wants a legal memo. No client wants legalese. I mean, I just literally today I received an email. It's just a lot of M&A lingo. And I'm just like, okay, let me take this is what I need. Not only for to make sure I understand it, but I have to convey this to our internal stakeholders, and this is going to be meaningless. So I think that conversational tone and that kind of, I'm not a lawyer, I'm kind of your business partner, is really important especially for a company at this stage.
Ariana, so no legalese. I like that. How do you live that in practice, right? So it's a pretty technical product, right? It's got physical security cameras. If you're watching on screen, Bill's got one behind his shoulder, and then a cloud component with computer vision, with some interesting things, right? Obviously, traditional machine learning, probably doing some other kinds of AI as well. So how did you do it? How did you become bilingual,
Mhm.
Ariana? And then any examples of what he's talking about? So Bill had a good example with the M&A memo where he's like, all right, the earn out and this and that and the the single triple trigger, whatever, all the things. But
Mhm.
ultimately he's like, let's get this deal done. What examples do you see on the privacy side, and how do you do it?
I'm trying to think about my day to day and some of the things that I just have integrated into my working style. But part of this stems from the fact that a lot of the product managers and engineering leads are in a different office. And so you don't really have these, and in certain circumstances, you might not have the opportunities to really kind of have these like water cooler conversations that really help make a conversation about legal guidance approachable. I feel like, so I feel like when I'm meeting somebody for the first time, I'm trying not to talk at all about work. I really want to get to know them. And every time I meet, I'll start off with like a question about what they did that weekend, because I think that that really helps. It's not the same question every time, but I'm really just trying to start the meeting off with something that is like a more human interaction so that it doesn't seem so transactional when you get on a Zoom call with somebody. I also think it's really effective to tie back the things that you're considering to the valuable points that matter to them. Behind every legal consideration, you're always kind of balancing, well, what's the business benefit or what's the business objective? And then what are the risks that are going to get in the way of that or could compromise that? And I feel like you know the business risks and the things that are going to impinge the business objective. But I feel like when you verbalize the business objective for your client or your internal client or your business stakeholder, it really reminds them that you're not just there to be a lawyer or provide some advice that's not meaningful. You're doing it to help solve their problem, and always bringing and it's self-reinforcing. It kind of brings you back to what's the overarching objective. And like, are we reaching that? Or is it that, are we still kind of focusing on enabling the business instead of just trying to create a set of yeses and nos? So, yeah, I think like humanizing the work as much as possible to make lawyering more approachable and kind of like destigmatize people's conception of what an in-house lawyer looks like or sounds like. And then also just really trying to reinforce that you understand the problems that they're trying to solve from a business perspective. I think that's just invaluable.
Can one of you make it real a little bit? Let's talk about a launch that you've done, either a country launch or a product launch or something. So a lot of our listeners are product counsel or, kind of maybe they're commercial, but I feel like a big time that gets tested is like, are you in the boat, to Bill's words, or not, is around a launch. And so, can you tell us about a recent product launch that you worked on, either of you?
Yeah, I have to like kind of rack my brain for a little bit. Think about we just got done wrapping up. We do a conference every year that kind of showcases some of the new feature launches and products that we're rolling out with. So there was a ton of work up to that point. I think that this is maybe a bit general, but I mean, I'm trying to be sensitive also to some critical product launches. But I think that one of the things that you really have to realize as an in-house lawyer is that you really can't solve every problem immediately. There's always going to be things that are deprioritized because there's just limited resources and limited time and attention to prioritize fixing everything. So, for example, like we're rolling out a new product related to it's like an intercom duo mixed with biometric access control. And so, there's obviously a lot of considerations of, making sure that this product is providing a lot of features that support different ways of compliance. Every company has a different risk tolerance, every company has a different internal process of meeting certain compliance obligations. And we're trying to be as accommodating as possible to kind of meet all of those customer needs. But, you really can't, launch everything, at the beginning when you're coming out with this new product launch. There's just limited time to get things done before launch time. And so I think kind of, in talking with the engineers, I kind of got a sense like, hey, they're kind of strapped with, they're trying to build this product. Like, good is always, you don't want to make that saying that you never want to make the perfect the enemy of the good. And I think having that sensibility where you're kind of being empathetic to the fact that they're resource constrained while also saying, hey, you know what, some of these compliance, features are privacy by design considerations. These are nice to haves, and they're also not going to be demanded by the immediate market. And so you kind of have to prioritize those. And I think that goes back to like the business judgment value that you bring in and being able to kind of spot opportunities where you have that sensibility and you can showcase that. It really just shows them that you're a partner and you understand, you're in the trenches with them, you understand what they're going through. That was more of like a general example, but yeah, I'm curious if anything comes to
I
mind more
think product
immediately.
launch is, I think, especially problematic for the in-house legal team because, and I think this holds true for most product launches, regardless of what industry you're in, you're going to have collateral with it that's going to be making claims about it. And one, you have to make sure that they're substantiating the claims are correct, but also they're, regulatory and, if you're in the hardware side, hardware compliance issues and make sure all those line up. But invariably what happens, you take a look and they have like an early draft of it and you look at it. And then it goes up the chain, gets changed like 15 more times. And then you say, we need to look at it again. And then you look at it again, but then whoever signed off on it wants to see if legal changed anything. So I think it's always hard on the product launch side is like, where does legal insert itself? And they really want, what they're used to without legal is just a kind of a steps to the process. A lawyer person drafts it, sends it to their boss, and then sends it to their boss and their boss, and it goes all the way up to the CEO, and then you're done. Problem is when you put legal in, they kind of have to see what it looks like to start, and they have to make sure the end product didn't change through that process. So they don't really fit neatly in a sequential process. I don't know, Ariana, we did have this big customer conference called Verkada 1 that we do every year. And it happens every single time because they're doing a ton of marketing collateral, not just the presentation itself at the event, which has a bunch of content, but there's a lot of collateral around that. There's side conversations. There's a lot of pushing out ads. And there's also kind of the main stage keynote speakers are talking. And so I find those are really good examples where I think product counsel functions so hard because they have to like make sure they're looking at all these different things from all these different angles, triaging ones, making sure they escalate ones where they think, okay, this truly is a problem and swallowing risk on others and how to make that distinction, but also trying to fit yourself in a sequential process that's not really sequential from a legal side. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense. So similar experience, product counsel, marketing counsel, at Amazon, we had, the day that we launched all the new and, funny, your story reminds me, it's not even just legal. There's a lot going on. So the name for the Alexa, the Amazon Echo was originally going to be called Flash, and they had boxes printed. I mean, this is literally physical hardware as you all sell. And Jeff Bezos is like, do we like that name? And everyone in the meeting is like, I guess not. And so literally the original Alexa shipped in a cardboard box, and all they could do was print the actual they printed like a card to go inside, but it was not enough time to reprint the boxes.
Yeah.
Literally, this was like product counseling on the devices were gonna get on a boat from China. So that resonates. I mean, for me, for my product counseling days, the hard part was when someone on the team, a more junior lawyer, so probably even, kind of, let's say, counsel level or even compliance manager type person, and the line person writing the marketing copy would clash, and then it would go up and it would come to me as like, legal says we can't say this. And I was, well, that's not exactly how it worked out. And like, here's why and here's not. And, it definitely took very specific kind of like, I guess, training of the junior folks to get to that point where you're trusted enough to then be on the chains as it goes up higher and higher. So I guess like question, so what do you do? So you're showing, okay, so you have this launch, there's some, let's say, compliance mechanics that maybe don't bubble to the top. That's okay. What do you do post-launch then, Ariana? So you have the launch, you've got this list. So I still remember we were looking at accessibility bugs. So CVAA, the Communications and Video Accessibility Act, requires that certain kinds of products have, closed captions, and they have
Mhm.
other, things for individuals who are blind. And you know, my counterpart on the engineering side went and marked a bunch of bugs won't fix. Like that was literally one of the tags. Like, ah, don't do that. Do not mark won't fix. So that was kind of my Laura moment. So what's your equivalent? What are you doing post launch? You have Verkada Verkada One, and you're doing more compliance. Is it just like an ongoing journey, or like put us in your shoes, and how do you do that well?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny because I feel like it's like a very large balloon that inflates, and then, there's this huge conference. There's a lot of pressure to get things ready for the conference, and that's different from the actual launch date. So it's kind of like this like artificial deadline to just get things in a way that's going to be, ready to present, not materially different from what we're doing afterwards. And so I think having that mindset like gave me a little bit of pressure release of like, does this need to be perfect for Verkada One, or can we, decide on this final decision down the line? And what product managers are, most concerned about is they want to make sure that the product that they're putting on is like the best version of that product, and they're not kind of like limiting the capabilities of the product early on in a way that's just going to be different from how we ultimately sell it. Yeah, I don't have like a ton of like I don't think I have any horror stories just yet, which is I guess a good thing. But I am really sensitive to the difference between ready for Verkada One versus like ready for launch. And what I've also come to understand too is that I think a lot of product managers and engineering managers as well, I don't think they build with the idea that this is. I mean, there's always going to be different and updated versions of a product. You're just like, what's the viable version of the product that we can sell that solves the customer's problems today, that they can rely on, and that really showcases our mission, which is like to make sure that privacy is a consideration. It's embedded in, making products in a privacy sensitive way. And so always trying to tie back the product to those privacy considerations and making sure that we're staying true to that, even in the early launches of products, which are important. So I think it's something that like we kind of hold dear at Verkada, and it's not something that I have to like virtue signal to the product managers. Like they know that that's an inherent value of our products and why our customers like trust our products. So that's kind of nice, but it hasn't really blown up in my face just yet. But I think that there is a difference between Verkada like conference ready and like launch ready, and then even then there's different versions.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had my, because I think everybody's had this where you're like, you said what? You can't say that. We need to change that
Mhm.
post launch. And to me, it was interesting. I've been at the company for about 3.5 years now. So I've been through 3 Verkada ones. And the first Verkada one, I think it was me and maybe 2 other lawyers. And then we started building a team. Now it's, we're about 20 folks now. And this was the first Verkada one where I went and saw the keynote and I saw the presentations and there was no surprises, because usually prior ones was like, wait, did anybody look at that before that was put together and presented? But there's always stuff you kind of see and you're like, okay, we got to tweak this and tweak that. And I think, there was one launch where we're about to launch a new product, and I just by happenstance heard what they were going to call it. Without getting the details, it was very similar to a name that a government agency had used. So it was one of those kind of movie moments where I'm like running down the hall to the VP or SVP of product saying, you can't use that name. You need to come up with a different name. And I explained to him why, and his face kind of went ashen. He's like, yeah, don't use that name. And so I think that kind of stuff will invariably happen because like I said, I think it's very hard. The product launch process, and Ariana's spot on, like there's a difference between conference ready and launch ready, but it's still the same issue of like, ideally legal's involved from the very get-go. So when they start building out these features, they have, if there's compliance sides on the privacy side or the product regulatory side, they hear about it and they can fix it at the beginning rather than have it baked in. So to your example, Cecilia, when you have a name and it's all boxed out and it's too late to change it. But I think, we are a little bit of friction when you start sticking us in there, and try to get into that sequential process while being frictionless as possible is probably kind
Mhm.
of the best thing you can try to do, because you really want to be there right when they're talking about it, because there's so many issues from when you think about freedom to operate on the patent side is an issue. We really want to be there in the beginning before they go down a path that is going to be problematic. On the privacy side, I'm sure, Ariana, you've seen where if you get earlier you get in, the more you can give guidance and kind of steer them away. Maybe they're on the wrong path.
Yeah, I also try to like I also really try to kind of let them into the work that we do by showing them and telling them, like, what are the important considerations for legal so that they have at least that understanding when they're going back to the head of product and then they're invariably going to talk to them about it to kind of like be a representative for legal there too and empower the product manager or the engineering lead to like understand what your key considerations are and like what you care about. I think if you can like, verbalize that and articulate it for the product manager, that, then it empowers them. They're not scared of changing like one word and then having to go back to legal because then you're kind of seen as, a bump in the road that's just kind of like stunting their creation, right? And then their development process. So trying to kind of include these as much guidance as you can so that you have a representative, even if you're not there, they understand your perspective. But that's been really helpful.
And I think it goes back to being in the boat, because I feel like the big thing I always kind of make sure, and I think is important to focus on, is what's the consequence if we don't do it the perfectly legal way?
Mm-hmm.
What's the consequence if you put something in a marketing ad that maybe isn't as substantiated as you want? What happens? Because the business is going to make a decision. Because I mean, there's going to be some rare cases where you just, what I call, throw your body across the tracks and say, you just cannot do this. I think that name of that product was a good example. That was not even really a legal issue. That was just this is a bad brand.
And the thing is next time, like, you have earned so much more trust by pointing that out, right? And it's like you see these ads of like, there was I think Apple had an ad or something where they smashed a piano and they smashed a whole bunch of stuff. And it was like basically that same week there had been like some apartment that had collapsed. And it was like, did nobody point this out? How many people watched this that nobody noticed it? I still remember on Alexa, actually, we had basically somewhat an ad, a proposed ad where um, it was basically gonna have a baby on the counter, like, crawling on the counter, and I was like, "No, like, that is not a thing, like, do not do that." Like, you're not supposed to turn your back on the kid however old they are, they're gonna fall off the counter. Maybe you hold them on the counter or you're, like, whatever, like, standing with them, but you're not letting them crawl on the counter unassisted, and it was one of these things where I was a mom at the time, and I watched it, it was just like you said, it was just the judgment, but the fact of having that judgment, I can tell you now from the CEO seat, I have a lawyer that helps us out, and there are times when I'm like, I just need a gut check on this, even social media posts, whatever it is. But you're right too, Ariana. You said something that's like when they use your language, it's almost like seeing your kids walk or something, where you're like, they get it. And so yeah, it's a fun one. Almost like and the trust value. Let's get real brass tacks. So do you do trainings and things on privacy, or like how do the sort of line employees at Verkada absorb that value that you described around, that your
Mhm.
products should be trusted, secure, this kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I think that there's like, it's pretty typical at most companies where you have like an annual privacy training. But I think what's unique about Verkada is we have such a very vast and wide product suite that, some of the product considerations for certain products are a lot more sensitive and critical than other products. Like we have like an air quality sensor. It's not collecting that sensitive of information as compared to a camera that has facial recognition technology where it's collecting biometric, vectors of your face in order to visualize, and either authenticate your identity or verify, you for like access control. So I feel like some of the ways that we've tried to really kind of embed that into the way that we interact and work with product team managers is really setting up these individual meetings with these and it can be per team. It's interesting about Verkada. This is different from other companies I worked at. Like, they have the product teams are separated and they also have, separate backend microservices. So even their backend is separate. So that makes, it imperative for you to kind of federate out your guidance. What's relevant to one product team or one, engineering lead is going to be different from another one. So we really try to have those regular product syncs where we're understanding like what are they focused on. Some of the more critical meetings that I feel like you can be in is actually the product planning and roadmap planning meetings, because there you're kind of understanding what are they like, what's keeping them up at night? What are they really trying to push out? And like, why are certain things getting prioritized over others? Like what's a P0, what's a P1 and why? Those were meetings that I had to kind of like really advocate to get at the table at branch, not because there wasn't a willingness, there just wasn't, that structure there. They didn't really have legal integrated into their design process. At the time when I joined, I was there for 5 years. There's clearly a lot of growing to do. And then, at Verkada, what's really amazing about the company is that it's, a late stage venture, I'd say, but, it grew so fast. So there's like a level of maturity in the product and, how well the business is doing. It's not always one for one in terms of the maturity of the organization. And you really have to kind of like put yourself into the organization, understand where they're at, meet them where they're at. Because if you try to kind of shove this like privacy by design program with all these shiny decks and like, I'm going to be in every meeting, it just doesn't always work. You kind of really have to understand how each product team works and then find natural, like intuitive ways to integrate yourself into those meetings where you are enabling them to launch without having to retract something or change something. That's the worst thing. When they push something out and then all of a sudden, hey, this needs to be changed and they're going to have to update the app or we're going to have to update this UI screen. Like no product manager wants to go back to their head of product and say, hey, we have to change this because then they're like, why? So I feel like, really trying to kind of embed yourself and meeting the team where they're at based on their maturity level and organizational structure is pretty key.
I think it's interesting, having come from two big, giant public companies before I came here. I think there's this notion of, one, those legal teams have unlimited resources, and two, those companies are super well run on the inside. And they're not. I mean, that's just, every
Not judge a
company,
book by the cover.
And I've talked to people who worked at Apple and Amazon. I'm sure you saw the same thing at Amazon, Cecilia. There's so many just crazy, chaotic things happening in these big companies that are kind of surprising. I remember at Google, we had this internal tool to track all the cases. We had tons of cases. The litigation team that I ran had, I think, 1,000 active cases. And we tracked that on a spreadsheet because the tool didn't work very well. It was a homegrown tool and it just was impossible to use. Most of the time, we just use spreadsheets to track our cases.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was an example of like people think of this like, we had this like polished system to track these things, and operationally it just ran like a well-oiled machine. Not at all. Not at all. And so when you come here, it's definitely chaos because we don't have the resources to buy all these kind of operational tools. But it is not when you're, I think, in the Valley in general, and you're in tech and you're in fast-moving companies, there's not operational top-level stuff. It's kind of a mess. It's kind of a mess, which is why they move so fast, which is good. I think you go to other bigger companies that are more traditional and slower moving. They have tons of process operations, which I guess can make you happy because it's better in that way. But they also move painfully slow, painfully slow.
It's an interesting debate, like so much goodness in what you all said. The Federate your advice, that's a new one. I had not heard that advice, that phrase. So I'm going to use that. And then the sort of like, everyone's a mess. So if you're listening and you're like, oh my gosh, my legal team, my
Make it
process is a
relatable.
mess, just like, take the reassurance that kind of everywhere, even the hugest companies, is kind of like in some ways an operational mess. But the ability to tolerate that, I think it is a personality thing as
Mhm.
well. And you see that even Netflix, I think until very recently had we reject process or something like that as a value. And there was a guy post
Mhm.
on LinkedIn. He's like, my title is the head of process, and I'm trying. That's a good one.
Yeah, I feel like some executives are very averse to it, to some extent, and in certain types of like, especially, in product development where, you don't want to stifle innovation by giving people a bunch of structure and process. It's going to slow them down, especially if you like you're working on AI where it's like time is resource, time is power. I feel
Yeah.
like I remember in my last role, we were, working on a problem within the company. I even forget what we were talking about, but I'll never forget the email that I got from the CEO at the time. And he responds back to like this group conversation's happening. It's like a very long email chain. And he just goes, this sounds really big company to me. And it was just, that was it. That was the email. And it was kind of a
Exactly.
really, yeah, it was like, you learn a lot from it. It's a really striking moment of like, what are we actually solving here? And like, are we overcomplicating things? And it's an email. I'm sure everybody has these, but it's an email that I'll never forget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's also that first principle approach. Like, just because everybody has a process, why do you need a process? Why
Hmm.
is there really a reason to kind of slow
Mhm.
down with process?
Sort of first principles. I mean, but then, obviously it has its place, right? So you're at the Verkada one, you've seen all the videos.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is good. Yeah, so I guess that's a good segue on process and tooling and how you move fast. Let's talk about AI. How are you thinking about AI within legal, both advising on it, so like maybe a little bit of the structure around or process, lowercase p, around how you advise teams on AI? You have a lot of products. How did you have you been thinking about that? And maybe there's a historical point too, which you all have been doing AI since before Gen AI. So what can the teams advising on Gen AI now learn from you, and what have you done?
Take that, Ariana. I can give kind of a
Yeah, well, I have some initial thoughts. I think for me, it's kind of all happening at once because, I worked at an ad tech company prior to Verkada. So when I came to Verkada, I came at Verkada at a time where there's this confluence of, AI, LLMs, AI governance, the UAI Act coming out. And I'm also now working with a hardware product that has an AI component. And that's, one of the main value propositions of the product. So I couldn't imagine a better time to have AI to learn AI. It's kind of like inception. I mean, there's just no way. I think that I can't imagine trying to wrap my head around learning how all the steps that engineers go through to try to prepare data to train a model without having having an LLM where I can just ask these baseline questions and really go through the reasoning process myself. Like it's such a game changer. It kind of speaks to this like larger theme that I think we're all seeing now is like, if you want to do lawyering, there's a baseline AI literacy you're going to have. And this is true for everybody at the company, but I feel like for lawyers especially, like we're at a time right now where like AI literacy is going to fill the gap where you can kind of like extend your skill set and even to some extent augment it to meet the capabilities and experience of people that have been lawyers for much longer than you or have a lot more lived experience than you. It's really trying to capitalize on that, especially given the complexity of the products that we build, has just been like, it's been a godsend. I feel like I came at Verkada at the right time.
Love it. I love it. Bill, how are you seeing that? Are you seeing kinda lawyers supercharged with AI? Like, is that something you're being intentional about with the team? Ariana took that question a different place than I thought, which is she's using AI to be a better lawyer.
Yeah,
Do
I
you think
think
that
to me,
too? Are you
there
encouraging
are
that?
two
Yeah.
pieces here that I think we're talking about. One is on the product side.
Mhm.
A lot of companies, and it's getting more and more, are using AIs in some way in their product. And for us, it's a major factor in our services that we provide through our hardware and software. And so there's an element there, just, the law is changing all the time, and just trying to catch up uh,
Mhm.
is a big piece. But I think what you're getting to is more like, how does the team use AI? And I think we were probably a little bit late to the game. Actually, we formed a little working group that Ariana's on to kind of look at what are the tools out there that could help our team specifically with what we're challenged with. We're like I said, 2,300 person company. Probably a 600 to 800 of those are in the sales org in some way. So we have a gigantic sales force because we're a B2B company, and there's a lot of deals, a lot of NDAs happening, a lot of user agreements, reseller agreements, vendor agreements. And I think where we looked at was like, well, let's look at, rather than kind of get overwhelmed by all the abilities and capabilities of AI, let's look at some low hanging fruit first and not go down this slippery slope of like, wow, this kind of shiny tool that can just solve so many problems.
Mhm.
We're not quite big enough. We don't have the resources enough to buy all these tools and buy all these different permutations. Let's look at, well, what are things that we can just solve that are kind of what we call low hanging fruit? Let's focus on those first. What are basic things that AI can come in an efficient and frankly cheaper way that we can start using as a foundation rather than try to just solve, boil the entire ocean of problems that we've got. So I'm really curious, Ariana, because you guys, that group has been going through some demos and I haven't checked in with y'all in a bit, but I think to me, the two big areas that we saw, one, Ariana's point is there's definitely a lot of capability with AI, regardless of the tools. There's GCAI, Harvey, or just Gemini or ChatGPT of, I've just got a basic question and I can ask it and just get a gut check. There's value there in that kind of research capability. And also first drafting, which is, I think, related. I had to draft kind of a very unique kind of I call secondary sale or secondary transaction policy. And there's no template of this. And
Mhm.
I was like, I just kind of did the prompts, described what I wanted, and this is just Gemini's spit out this amazing draft. That was a workable draft. I had to make a lot of tweaks to it, but it probably saved me a couple hours, just that initial draft. So that's
Mhm.
one piece. And then I think the other piece is just contract review. That's kind of near and dear to our kind of legal flows. I think there's a ton you can do there.
Mhm.
And we saw those as kind of too low-hanging fruit. But I think, Ariana, you guys have been working I think we kind of formed that earlier this fall. Like, it's been several months now of kind of be more intentional about, let's actually look at some opportunities and which tools should we engage.
Yeah, there's certainly use cases that members of the team are more interested to solve and versus others that they feel like it's overcomplicating it by using AI, which is interesting. But yeah, it's really kind of also freed up a lot of time to do creative lawyering. I think so much of our work is spent doing a lot of time consuming tasks. So it's exciting to think about a world where, the value you bring is really from your ability to think critically and spend your time doing creative lawyering work versus, what now AI is going to be doing for a lot of us. So no more first drafts from outside counsel, I'll tell you that much.
There you go. I love it. I love it. Yeah. So on AI specifically, how do you all think about public policy on AI? And maybe the new California bill, SB 53, requires companies to publicly disclose mitigating catastrophic AI risks. Obviously, all are in schools. You have some pretty, law enforcement type, I guess, use cases. What have you thought about either public policy or like just how do you help the company figure out its position on these things? Maybe that's the creative lawyering that you mean.
Yeah, to me, from the company perspective, I think Verkada, we're a B2B company where the government's a big kind of customer demographic for us. Schools are a big demographic for us, as well as kind of the Fortune 50 up to the Fortune 1000. I think we're definitely not like my prior companies who are going to be on the forefront, a very top of funnel branding so everybody knows their names. I think we're fine when nobody knows what Verkada is. They just know their products. And, the Verkada cameras are on my son's elementary school, for example. And I don't think people know that. They just know it's a white camera, right? So I think on the policy front, we don't envision or want to be tip of the spear on those types of issues, whether it comes to be privacy or AI policy, Gen AI policy. And I think that kind of informs how we kind of approach the policy perspective from a company perspective. It's just fly under the radar. It's something that our head of comms, she started just a couple months before I did. I interviewed her, was one of the first people I interviewed because I was like, I want to talk to somebody who just joined. But we are very much in cahoots on that kind of vision of like, let's just fly under the radar. We don't, it's just, that detracts from our business and our kind of profile, necessarily so, because we don't need to be the tip of the spear on that stuff.
We used to
Yeah,
talk about running with the pack. Yeah,
the
and I think
policy.
on privacy, I mean, that makes a lot of sense on privacy as well, right? I mean, it's still when you think about like the traditional kind of FTC sort of like reasonable expectation, right? It's like, okay, your reasonable expectation is formed by what is the radar? Like, what is the normal thing you would expect? You would expect a camera in a school. So things like that. Cool. I
Right.
love that. All right, so let's go to kind of closing reflections. Let's do a lightning round. So, what's a book idea or concept or podcast that has shaped how you lead? Let's start with Ariana.
Book idea or podcast. I think the quickest thing that comes to mind is like a idea about leadership. And I go back to leadership. Your biggest asset as a leader is your authentic. And I learned that because I feel like I've been surrounded by a lot of different types of leaders that I've admired, but they all have different styles. And at some point in my career, I kind of wondered, do I need to change the way that I or the way that I act in order to be more esteemed by my colleagues or more respected. And I got an answer from my boss at the time, but I think that over time I've learned too that, really your power as a leader comes from the ability of people to perceive you as being authentic to yourself. And so I really try to live that day in and day out. I don't try to be something I'm not. And hopefully that ultimately makes me successful in life. So yeah.
I love that. Bill, how about you?
I think there are two things that come to mind. One is kind of, it's not something that I wanted to model. Kind of going earlier, kind of building the team. What do I look for? What is Verkada looking for when we hire? Going back to my Google days, Jonathan Rosenberg and Eric Schmidt, who are two executives, they published a book together. And I think they dedicated a chapter to kind of what they call hiring what they call a diva, but kind of the big personality, big ego, because they're just going to get stuff done. So they're a big proponent of that. And I think it showed in the Google workforce. There are a lot of egos at Google, and people got a lot of stuff done, just crazy smart people and imposter syndrome everywhere because of that. But I think that experience made me think, I don't like that approach. I don't want to seek out and hire the egos. And it was kind of refreshing when I went to Tesla, the legal team, I think the company in general, I mean, we had a very big ego at the top of the company, almost no room for egos below. And it was refreshingly, this is not a word, but refreshingly egoless. And so when I came to Verkada, I think it was very intentional. If I interviewed somebody and I had a hint of an ego, a person went down a notch in my view of where they would be a right fit for the team. So I think that's one thing that's definitely shaped me. It's like I really intentionally try to hire the people because I don't think you need an ego to be ambitious. I don't think you need an ego to be driven. I don't think you need an ego to drive things to completion. You can do all that without an ego. So I don't know, Ariana, but I feel like, did you get that? Because I definitely feel like
Didn't meet a diva. Didn't
What?
meet a diva.
Yeah, and I feel like
Verkada.
Logman as well. She's our amazing recruiter. Like I think we've actively tried. Like I look at the team, there's just not a lot of ego there on the team.
And that actually takes us to the top of the hour, right? Like people find there's a lid for every pot, right? And it sounds like the two of you really have like a really nice kind of vibe. And I can tell that like, okay, the boat that is this like very high growth environment, very challenging, intellectually and from a business standpoint, product that you're supporting, like it kind of like it sounds like you found the right place. So that's great. If I'm a listener to this, I'm like, well, sign me up. This sounds like a great place to practice law and to work. So thank you both for being here. You've shown a lot about leadership, some really great kind of product counseling, tactile stuff. I feel like everybody talks about contracts. So even though commercial counsel folks, I love you, but this was a product counseling episode, which I love. Awesome. All right. So where can listeners connect with you if they want to follow you?
We're like
Yeah.
off the radar. No,
Yeah,
Off
I'm
the radar.
off the
You're like,
radar.
you cannot. Like, sorry, just
you can
like
come to Verkada's office.
notice
No.
our cameras
I
down and
had
we're
a
looking for
Twitter when I
Verkada.
was at Tesla. Was the only time I had a Twitter account because I kind of needed one.
Yeah, of course.
But I
Makes sense.
shut it down
Funding
after I left.
secured. Hashtag funding secured. Let's go.
I'm on LinkedIn, but I don't really post that much.
LinkedIn. All right, we'll check you out on LinkedIn. We're gonna drop if you have the name of that book from the kind of anti-pattern, so we can read how to not hire divas. Share that. We'll post it
Yeah,
in
I'll
the
try to
show
look that
notes.
up.
Amazing, awesome. Hey,
Thanks for
thank you
having
both
us.
for being here. That was my conversation with Bill Berry and Ariana Goodell from Verkada, and they're a reminder that the best legal teams are human and apparently egoless, but also that you do things to really support your stakeholders and make products happen. When leaders build trust and really are intentional around how they work, it looks like everybody wins. So follow CZ and Friends wherever you get your podcasts, and you can visit gc.ai to learn more about how legal teams are using AI, as Bill and Ariana described, to work smarter and lead with impact and do more creative learning. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.